Aloha, everybody. This is Cathy Bilsky, the Quantum Leap and Let Light Unite show. UPRN Radio. This is March 22nd, 2019. Oh, my goodness. I have to tell you really quick before I bring my guest on, Judith Bellow. We're going to talk about Venezuela tonight, and it's really important because it's what's going on down there. We really need to have brought up to the surface so more people are aware. But before I bring her on, I want to touch base with you. I went down to Mexico again to have teeth work done. Now, if you've ever listened to my programs, you know I went down to Mexico and had like 22 crowns put in, 3 teeth pulled, 2 root canals and a back bridge for under $5,000, and they did it in a week. So, you know, having all that done, I had one little thing that I needed to be repaired because when they pulled one of the teeth, the tooth shrunk and a pocket formed. They guarantee their work. So I basically went back to Mexico. They paid for my hotel and they did all the work. And it was like a 5-crown bridge they had to put together. In the United States, it would have been like $10,000. And it cost me nothing. So, you know, that's it. I'm letting you guys know that there's another dental alternative out there that you need to know about if you really need work done. And, you know, it can happen where you don't have to sell your house to get it done. And that's Sani Dental, right below Las Algodones in Yuma, Arizona, below Yuma, Arizona. So if you want more information, contact me on Facebook or through UPRN Radio or the Facebook website on UPR Radio. Just say, "Attention, Cathy," and I can give you more details. And tomorrow I'm going to do a live Facebook and talk about my experiences down there and how I can make it really easy for you to go get your teeth fixed. Okay, enough said about teeth. Welcome, Judy. Thank you very much for coming back on the program.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you again, Cathy.
So for everybody, Judy Bellows was on my program a couple years ago, and this woman is really incredible. We talked about Syria. Now, let me tell you a little bit what Judy does. Drone welfare, the illegal and immoral piloting of hunter drone killers. She talks about that. She's active with Upstate New York Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars, is on the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and active with Stand Together Against Racism and Islamophobia, STARI. She has been participating in the Upstate Coalition Gandhian Wave at Hancock Air National Guard Base for several years, where activists persistently draw attention to the illegal and immoral piloting of hunter-killer drones over Afghanistan and other countries by Hancock's 174th Attack Squadron. Now, Judy has visited Iran twice with Fellowship of Reconciliation Peace delegations and spent a month in the Kurdish city of Sulaymaniyah in 2009 and met with drone victims in Pakistan with the Code Pink Peace delegation in the fall of 2012. In the spring of 2014, she visited Syria as an election observer along with 8 representatives of the US, UK, Canada, and numerous other representatives of countries in Asia, Africa, and South America. She believes that justice and respect for the sovereignty of all nations is critical to building world peace. The way to build a more just and peaceful society is for people to reach across international, inter-ethnic, interracial, and intercultural boundaries to form a global grassroots network of individuals working towards peace and justice through love and understanding. And she's going to come out, she's here on the show tonight because we are going to talk about Venezuela and what's happening out there. Judy, how in the world first did you get started in this kind of activism?
Well, I guess my son went off to school, and here I was, and I went to a talk by someone who had recently been to Iran, and I thought, wow, you can do that? So I decided to go. And then, I made friends with people, and I met more people, and I had already, I think at that point, been keeping my blog for a while, where I was just kind of trying to understand events through writing about them, and so I would like process the news of the day or the week by writing about it. And so now I'm actually not maintaining my blog because I'm so busy, because I'm working, and I'm also administering a blog called End the Wars at Home and Abroad. And when I administer it, what I do is, because of all the I probably wouldn't do this, except there's all this censorship on the internet, so that news that doesn't come straight out of, corporate sources is basically either pushed off the list or it's pushed to the bottom of the list, so that people don't get to read about what real research is going on out there, what investigations are happening, what's going on in other parts of the world, because the corporations are controlling the news you see. So, what I do with this blog I administer, what I do is I take what I think are the best articles around, or I try to have a theme sometimes, and I post them to this blog, and then every 2 or 3 weeks I put out a newsletter with a list of, which I think that you received one, Cathy, or maybe no, it was about Palestine. Anyway, I put out a list of all these, of the articles I posted since the last time, with just a little thing that names the author and gives an idea of what the subject is. So sometimes I'm thematic, and other times I just try and get the best about everything. It sort of depends on what's happening. And so that's a good way to stay educated, though. You have to do a lot of reading and pick the right ones. And so I've been doing that, and friends of mine, interestingly, just got back from Venezuela. The U.S. Peace Council sent a delegation of, it might have been 8 or 10, I'm not sure, people to Venezuela. And the U.S. Peace Council, I actually went to Syria with a group from there in 2016, and they do fact-finding missions. So the delegation goes there, it's all civilians, to go around, talk to all the people that you want to meet, and with people in government, with people not in government, and with opposition forces, and just talk to people on the street to really get a feel for whether what you've been, which story you've been hearing is true. So it's kind of an exciting thing. I didn't go this time, but I have heard from the people who were there, and so I have fresh news on Venezuela. What you want to say?
Well, let's talk about. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's talk about Venezuela, and tell everybody what in the world is going on down there. I'm really confused.
Well, it is very confusing, because a lot of the news in the mainstream news and the corporate news sources isn't true. Because the United States has decided, for a variety of reasons, that they have to get rid of the current government of Venezuela. And they've been operating in this mode for a while. Recently, they haven't been deposing, at least not in the sense they're doing in Venezuela. They haven't been deposing rulers in South America, but they used to. They did a whole lot in the 70s and 80s of kicking out rulers down there. And presidents, I say rulers, presidents or whatever they're called in that particular state. And in the last couple of decades, they've been busy in the Middle East, and now they've come back to Venezuela. So the news that you hear that there's a humanitarian crisis and the people have nothing to eat, and it's because they're governed by this evil dictator and named Maduro. But in fact, one of the pieces of news that my friends came back with is that people there are not starving in the streets. people there. The government is getting some subsidies from the United States. Has had Venezuela under sanctions, under increasingly severe sanctions for the last 2 decades since Chavez came to power, and there was the Bolivarian Revolution about 18 or 20 years ago. And ever since then, because they were a socialist country, the United States has been increasing the sanctions. Meanwhile, though, right around the time Hugo Chavez died and Nicolas Maduro came to power, the price of oil dropped way low. Now, Venezuela has a great deal of oil. It's one of the largest untapped resources on earth of oil. So the United States is, of course, hot to control that oil. It's not even really that we need it. They want to control it. So if anyone needs it, they have to come to us. And so in Venezuela, this tightening of the screws, there's this, when Chavez came to power, he was representative of the working class, and they have something there that we don't have in the United States, which is a sub-working class, which are peasants, more or less. And they're not working class because they don't work in factories. They're peasants, they're little small farmers, they're people who are street vendors, but they're not in something recognizable. They're a social stratum that doesn't really exist in the United States. And the working class and this sub-working class brought Chavez to power. They voted him into power, and they continue to support Nicolas Maduro and to vote for him. And this makes the wealthy people in the country, who are a minority and therefore cannot control the government democratically, very angry, because they want to have access to come through their government. They want to have access to Western wealth, basically. And they don't want to live in a socialist society where their access to extreme wealth is limited by a government that's distributing wealth among the people. So Venezuela in the last 20 years went from 80% illiteracy to like 90 or 100% literacy. Everybody can read now. They went from having no health care for poor people to having universal health care. They went from having very few schools to having a school in every village. So that kind of improvements have been made through this government that they're calling a dictator. But the government really, Maduro was elected. He was elected last year, and he took office in January. And but because the United States wants him to go, they had this other young guy who's part of the opposition party just decided to declare himself president. And the United States got, 40 or 50 countries to back him and say, okay, he's really the president. And on that basis, they stole even more of Venezuela's wealth. All the money they had in foreign banks that had to go through the American money system has now been frozen. But when you say frozen, that means the Venezuelans can't have it, but the banks can continue to use it. And they also froze all the money that belongs to Citgo, which is the Western refinery that sells Venezuelan oil. So it's been a very hard time for Venezuela, but they are getting some help. They're getting help from China and Russia because who else can they have? They've been basically, this is the old spite your nose, cut off your nose to spite your face trick that the United States does over and over again. They're mad because Venezuela won't do things our way, so they persecute Venezuela. So the other countries that they don't want to influence Venezuela have to come in and help Venezuela because they need the help. So it's a very sad story in terms of our government's behavior and in terms of what the results will be for us, basically, which is that the world is becoming more polarized and divided. And it's basically empowering the other side to grow because we're turning potential friends into enemies. So in Venezuela, though, the people are not starving. Maduro is not attacking people. The government, the military isn't attacking people in the streets. And in fact, they have a special plan there that Chavez started like 15 years ago, where they have essentially a national guard of, they call it, they refer to them as militias, but it's what the National Guard was when this country was born, which is local people who train with the military periodically, who have committed that if someone invades their country, they're going to go to war and help drive them out. And so they have a large force of potential soldiers if they were to be attacked, which we certainly hope they will not be attacked. So that's kind of the broad picture, and maybe you could find some other questions related to that, or we could, I have my list of stuff I sent you here too.
Well, all right. Well, one of the things on your list, maybe you can explain, and then you've got the Trump and you have Democrats and international fascists, and they attack Venezuela. So can you expand on that?
Well, yes. It is one of the few things that Trump has done that the Democrats have applauded is attack Venezuela. So I guess what we might ask is why? When I say, and I don't know if I did say, I did, look at that, international forces, and you said fascists, but that's what it is. Basically, corporations want to own the world. They do not want little socialist countries that are beyond their reach, in essence, that claim sovereignty away from them. And so, and the two parties in the United States, unfortunately, are basically just two sides of one party. And they have different faces, but they don't have different policies, not really, not in any deep sense. And their top policy is to support the corporate control of things. And the United States controls the World Bank. It controls the International Monetary Fund. It controls NATO, which is, a military group that includes most of Europe. So the United States controls a lot of international powers. It doesn't control the United Nations, but it tries really hard to control the Security Council, which it only has modest luck with because China and Russia have equal force on there. But the United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court because you have to be a member for the criminal court to prosecute you. You either have to be a member or sent there by the Security Council where they have a veto. So the Security Council will never send them and they won't join because they don't ever want to be held responsible. This is the United States government doesn't want to be held responsible for its actions in the global sphere, shall we say. But China and Russia are growing stronger, and so the United States does feel like it needs to act and do things to keep itself in control of everything. But unfortunately, the things it's doing might not be the most constructive, by my opinion. When you keep sanctioning countries so that they have to form an alternative way to support themselves among themselves, then that's not helping you hold, economic power. If you keep attacking people so they have to band together to resist you, that's not going to get you any power either. It's ultimately growing the other side and making them hostile because they're attacking them. So these are very bad policies in the United States. However, it is something that's very bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans pretty much equally support that, just like the Democrats, one of the few, Trump is much hated by the Democrats and liberals, but when he bombed Syria, they all applauded and said he was a president at last, Well, it's crazy, to applaud somebody only when they're a barbarian.
That's true. And what really caught my eye is, when you link, Trump, he's obvious fascist. But then when you put the Democrats in the same sentence as international fascists, that made me step back.
Well, the problem is that their policies, they're the ones who passed all those sanctions on all those other countries. They've had billions of dollars, through corporations. That's the only way they can afford to run for office. They're ultimately answerable to the corporations, and that was the oldest. To me, that's the purest definition of fascism, where things are controlled by the corporations. And the United States, sadly, is more and more. Trump, it's true, he's vulgar. He's directly, his fascism is over. He's white supremacist, and he's really got a very ugly face. But the Democrats, they make minor exceptions, but they're taking money away from the schools and giving it to the military too. And I actually asked my new congressman locally, who's in office, about next year. I was with other people actually. We asked him about next year's military budget because last year Trump put in this outrageous, I think it was like $50 billion increase in our military budget, and the Democrats made this big fuss about how ridiculous that was. And then when they passed it, they added $30 billion to the 50, so it was $80 billion added to the previous year's military budget. And this money, all the while they're saying, "Oh my goodness, we're going to have to take it away from Social Security. We're going to have to take it out of, education. We can't afford to have free public education. We can't afford Medicaid, which is, the medical insurance for people who don't have a lot of money, And so essentially, then the Democrats say, we'll protect those things, but in the end they compromise, and so something is lost every time. But they didn't, balk at sending all that money to the military.
That's true.
And,
now, one of the things that I wasn't really aware of, and I think people should really be concerned about this, is that the war on Venezuela is actually a racist war against the natives because they're the descendants of African slaves and their dark-skinned progeny.
Right. The mestizos are descendants of the African slaves who intermarried with the natives, with the Indians, basically, who were there. And and that is where you get that whole working class plus sub-working class majority in the country, because they have only a very small light-skinned upper class there, and those people are trying to get rid of Maduro, and they're trying to get rid of the Bolivarian revolution, so to speak, the socialist government that puts the welfare of everybody ahead of their ability to make a profit. And they've been doing all kinds of awful things. They've been, a couple of years ago, they were literally standing on either side of the road. I remember when we used to do this when I was a kid, only we didn't have a rope. We would see if we could stop the car by standing on either side of the road, pretending we had a rope, crossing the road. Children do dumb things. Well, anyway, we thought that was entertaining. And then I hear that in Venezuela, these quote-unquote students who are in the revolution are holding a wire from either side of the road, across the road, and decapitating people on motorcycles. And, I mean, that seems a little extreme. And I think the main thing to remember about this, though, is that it has nothing to do with democracy. And it doesn't have anything to do with the humanitarian crisis either, because the United States could immediately end any humanitarian crisis in Venezuela by just giving them back their own money, and they won't. So basically they wanted to send them a pittance of aid, and Maduro said, "Don't bother. We're getting aid from other people. We want our money back. We want our." It would be like a thief came and held you up and stole everything you have, and then offered you, a soup kitchen for a charity. It's crazy.
Well, would you say, I really don't remember this part of history, do you think that any of this upper white class supremacy, they're Nazis?
Honestly, I haven't heard that. I know there's Nazis in Argentina, and that was a real issue. But I haven't heard that about Venezuela. I think what they are is diehard capitalists. And corporate capitalists are, people who want to make money off of other people rather than bring up the whole welfare of the community, especially in a community that's that impoverished at the get-go. That, right now, the poor in Venezuela are better off, even with this so-called humanitarian crisis, than they were before Chavez was voted president. So the government that they're protecting is still helping them more than in a world where there's racism and there's their land is being stolen and used for large farms or oil or whatever, and where excuse me, where they don't have work and they can't sustain themselves. So and just not having medical care in itself is a huge loss. I mean, people die young, babies die. In a country, among people who have no access to medical care. And in the U.S., I don't know what it's like in Hawaii, but all over Europe, people have medical care as a benefit that's part of, everybody has medical care. It's subsidized. And when I say subsidized, they don't, right now, the big problem we have in the United States is we have these insurance companies who are middlemen. Of course, they don't want to give that up. But so the government, which is owes more to corporations than to the people, because that's how they got elected, doesn't want to take power away from the insurance companies. They don't want to take power away from the pharmaceutical companies. So having the government involved doesn't help you, because the government is just a pass-through for these places that are basically ripping people off. But and obviously there's some people that don't have enough to be bothered to rip them off. But as far as Europe goes, everybody has medical insurance, and the government negotiates, and the government has a program that makes it so that everyone has access. And they don't have the insurance companies as middlemen. And the same is true in a lot of third world countries, actually. Even countries like Kurdistan and Syria and Venezuela have national health care programs where people can get the basics. And of course, if they're under sanctions, that means it doesn't include a lot of the stuff that we can get here in the U.S. because they're not allowed to have that for anyone. And so rich people travel out of the country to get treatment. And poor people
I just went
out.
to Mexico. Yeah, I went to Mexico to get my teeth fixed. And
right,
between what they did, it would have cost $50,000 in the United States, and cost me $5,000. So, but I have to ask you a question. I heard that now there's a lot of people trying to leave Venezuela. Is that true?
Well, there have been people who have left. a lot of people actually went into Colombia and came right back because they weren't very happy there, because Colombia provides nothing to refugees. But they're essentially migrants because with the sanctions, the government has lost its ability to give them jobs. It's lost its ability to be creative with their social services because the sanctions make it so that essentially they don't have, and my sense is, from what I hear from old hands, is that Maduro's doing his best, but he wasn't really prepared. I mean, here he comes into office, their main resource loses value, the value of it is cut in half, and the U.S. piles sanctions on the country. The rich people go nuts, and so he has not managed this successfully. However, the question arises how many people could. And is the answer to just hand everything over to the wolf at the door because you're not be able to manage it really well as long as they're there? Or is the answer to get the wolf away from the door?
Well, I've heard, also read, and tell me if that's true, that Guido, that he's been groomed by the CIA to step into this role.
Right. Well, Guido he's been trained by the CIA. He went to George Washington University for a while, where he got special training in Washington, D.C. He has, but he belongs to the farthest right-wing party in Venezuela. And he's sort of always been the sort of assistant to the leader of that party, which has created a lot of violence in the country. And because of that, the leader of that party is now in jail. So Juan Guaido is was taken up by the U.S., but he's actually been unable to do anything that he said he could do. So he said, we'll buy off the military, but they couldn't do it. And that tells you a lot about where the people stand in the country. They couldn't buy off anyone who holds any power within the military. And they couldn't convince them to help this other, Juan Guaido's group. And they couldn't, they tried really hard in the last 2 years, really, to damage the economy. He and the other people in his social crowd, they were money laundering Venezuelan money and causing extreme inflation by the way they were selling it across the border. So they were basically making money off of trading currencies, which extremely devalued the Venezuelan currency, the bolivar. And they were, but he does not have a significant following. There are other people than his little following who do not like what's happening in the government right now, but they also don't want it to see it violently overthrown. And it would be like, I don't want to say Trump because I think I have a higher opinion of Maduro than Trump. He's certainly more of a decent human being. But even in this country, much as everybody hates Trump, if they got a guy backed by China and said, and China threatened routinely to overthrow the country on the behalf of this other guy in the interest, say, on behalf of Hillary Clinton, in the interest of democracy, would Americans accept that? Because that's what America's doing with Juan Guaido in Venezuela, and I don't think people would accept it here either.
No. Now, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I still remember my uncle when he came back from Korea. He said, if they ever come here and do to us what we just did to them, I'm going to be out there behind a tree with my shotgun. And, I mean, it really is a double standard. So go ahead with your question, though.
What does The revolution in Venezuela, what does that have to do with Haiti?
Oh, it's a very interesting question. It opens up a new set of information, really. Since the time of Chavez, Venezuela was giving either very good deals or loans or free loans of oil to other Caribbean countries to help them in return for various exchanges. So like they were doing it, they got a lot of medical people into Venezuela from Cuba in return for oil. So they were basically trading just oil for whatever. And there was a deal over the last decade, I think, with Haiti, where they were providing oil to Haiti at a very low interest rate. And so it was one of their charities, actually, they were doing. And like I say, they're trying to build a solidarity in the region. And I actually think that's really important. I mean, every region should have regional solidarity and countries able to look after each other. So what happened, though, in Haiti was...
Oh, go ahead.
Did you say something? Okay, so what happened in Haiti was that they found out recently that there were profits from that oil that the government was making on the side in Haiti from the oil they got from Venezuela. And two things happened. One is that Venezuela cut off the oil supply because of this pressure from the United States and all this revolutionary stuff and everything else going on there. So that's one thing that happened. The other is this might be how the Haitians became aware of the theft, because the theft was from them, and it was of the free gift of Venezuela to them. So, and then this person governing there, who was another American puppet, had the nerve to complain about it. And the Haitians just went crazy, and they were like, we want our money. We want the money from our Venezuelan oil, and we want this guy out of here. We're done with this. And so basically, they started to see that there was, again, the people at the top praying, backed by the U.S., preying on the poor people in these countries. And Venezuela had got just far enough ahead to be able to stop that from happening, but now they're having a fight for their lives. And Haiti has just been, I mean, they had a president a few years ago who was Jean Aristide, who the United States, because he started again with these socialist services for the poor people, the United States took him put him on an airplane in the middle of the night, dragged him out of his bed, put him on an airplane, and sent him to Africa, South Africa, I think. And then after a while, they let him come back, and then they did it again. And because they decided that he wasn't, doing their bidding. So it's just like it's just a real power struggle for these people to keep their sovereignty there in South America.
I remember growing up when ever there was something major that would go on in the world, Cuba always sent their healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, and they did it for free, for service.
Right. And they're still doing it, I think.
Nobody talks about that anymore, but I remember, and not once, but it was like all the time. If there was a major disaster, Cuba sent their medical staff.
I know, all over the world. And it's interesting because when they had the big earthquake in Haiti not so long ago, the U.S. sent their military in, but they actually have a law in the United States that you can't, was that Haiti? Yeah, I think it was. that you can't take anything to Haiti without first taking it to the United States or something crazy like that. And so when Cuba sent their doctors, the U.S. blocked them from going on shore. And then the U.S., so they said, okay, we'll put our own hospital ship out there. But it didn't serve people the way having doctors who would just go into the neighborhoods and help people out would. And again, it serves a different part of society. And they
I wonder if they did that to Puerto Rico, because I remember them sending out their naval ship and putting it out far enough in the bay where people couldn't get to them.
Right, but they wouldn't let the Cubans in either. That wasn't Haiti. It was Puerto Rico where they did that, because they actually have a law, because Puerto Rico is a U.S. protectorate that says that you cannot deliver anything to Puerto Rico without having the ship touch base in the U.S. first. So
I think that's
the law.
Sorry.
That means the Puerto Ricans can't get aid from anybody else unless the U.S. okays it.
Correct.
So even they're mad at Venezuela right now. They're getting all their aid through China and Russia because, they can. And they're also mad. I think some of the reasons why the U.S. picked now to go after Venezuela is two things. One is that Russia was building an air base there, and the government, and it might be true, were thinking he was going to put missiles there. And I have to say, though, we're the ones that had Venezuela under sanctions all these years and refused to interact with them. And what are they supposed to stay in total isolation? But at any rate, the Russia has backed off on that plan. But China is a major oil buyer from Venezuela, and China has been building a port on the Caribbean, right on the shore of Venezuela. And it's near whatever's just north of Venezuela. And my maps aren't that good, unfortunately, in my mental maps. But at any rate, they're building a port, and what they were going to do is use the Panama Canal. In other words, they could send a ship through the Panama Canal, turn the corner and go down a few miles, and boom, they're there. So the U.S. is very hostile to this idea. And but if they can't trade with us, they have to trade with somebody. It's very much, it's really so counterproductive, the U.S. attitude towards this. We won't trade with them unless we can own them, and we won't let them trade with anyone else either. So it's a very difficult situation. And I have to say that was another reason, I think, why they went after Libya at the exact moment. They have so many reasons to go after these countries, and this is another thing that was happening in Venezuela. Maduro, I don't know who he had advising him, but he decided to create a Bitcoin base for part of their economy. I don't think it was for all of it. I think it was for part of it. So that would take it off the dollar. See, and when Gaddafi, when we invaded Libya in the year or two before that, Gaddafi went around Africa and told everyone on having a single African currency based on gold that he happened to have, and that would be traded through all of Africa, and they would go off the dollar. And he did something else too, which is that because, again, he was under U.S. sanctions all those years, most of his oil wells, and Libya was another big oil country before we destroyed it, most of the oil wells were being operated by Chinese companies. Because China, think about it, they have so many more people than we do in the U.S., and they want cars too. They need heat. And I'll give some credit. China is developing solar at a more rapid rate than the U.S. because their economy isn't sort of in the grasp of the oil barons. But as far as I'm concerned, no one should use oil. But at the same time, what the U.S. is doing is whenever China or Russia, steps in somewhere, then they come down on that country.
Yep, and the United States certainly doesn't like to lose its money value. Now, we've only got a few more minutes left, and I know you've agreed to come on next week to talk about Palestine. And
Yes.
why don't you say something really quick what's going to happen on March 30th?
Okay, so two things are going to happen on March 30th. With relation to Palestine, there is that is Land Day, and the Great March of Return, which has been going on in Gaza for the last year, of people basically protesting at the border over the fact that Israeli has Gaza fenced in like a cage, and most of the people who live there lived in what we now call Israel before they were driven out, and now they're in Gaza in this tiny little, very, very crowded area, which is being suffocated. So there's going to be a major thing going on there, and it's also, in the long term, it's something called Land Day, which is a commemoration of a time when some 6, I think, Israeli Palestinians, in other words, there were Palestinians who actually live in the territory called Israel, were murdered for protesting the theft of their land, of their villages. And so that's a very big deal to Palestinians. And I'm going to tell you about a statement that you can sign. I'll send it to you before then, Cathy. And that's some Palestinians trying to lay claim to their country. And at the same time, Trump just gave Israel permission to take the Golan and annex it, and no longer consider it occupied, which the whole world is standing up against, because that's totally against the rules according to the United Nations. If you occupy someone's land, you have to ultimately give it back. You cannot just own it, like, say, the United States occupied Hawaii and dismissed the other government and now owns it. It's now a state. You can't do that anymore. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. And I will say that also there's going to be a big group of actions in Washington, D.C. between the 30th and the 4th of April, because it is, they're having a NATO meeting there at that time. And they're also going to be talking about Venezuela at these events, because they actually let Colombia become an ancillary to NATO, so that they can, use Colombia to control Venezuela. And so this is a big weekend for action. And it's also the anniversary of Martin Luther King's death. And there's going to be a lot of black people from the United States who are going to say, well, everybody is going to say this, but there's a lot of black people who are very upset that they're having a NATO meeting on Martin Luther King's anniversary. And there's a lot of people who are going to be holding signs that say yes to Martin Luther King, no to NATO. I'm pretty sure. No to, hands off Venezuela, hands off Syria. And Palestine, they're having something on the 26th in Washington. And I assume it'll be a support for the Great March of Return and for the right of return of Palestinians to their own country. In other words, that, for a couple thousand years, the Palestinians were living there. And now someone's come and carved out more than half of their land and given it another name and driven them out. And they're not even willing to share it. It's kind of like the Native Americans, put them on a reservation.
That's true. And we're going to have to talk about that more in depth next week, because we've actually run out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about Venezuela. I know I'm have more understanding on what's going on down there. And truthfully, You know, for me, because I do have an African American daughter, and you know, when you say it's a country that's was created by slaves and you know, and the Indians that were there, the natives. Again, it reminds me of what's happening. You know, like you said, that's why they overran Cuba. You know, Cuba didn't do what they had to say, and you know, it is a white racist campaign.
Yeah, it's very sad. It's so frustrating because ultimately the people driving all this are about power. And but it's to think that a handful of people in the North can oppress the entire global South and all the black and brown, and you know, all the beautiful people and variety of the human race. It's really offensive to think that a few people think because of their skin color or whatever that they should govern it. And unfortunately, in this country, you know, Trump is really inflaming racism because he's making white people really insecure. But the real problem is these people who use one race against another. It's the same as using the Sunnis against the Shia in the Middle East. It's you know, turning people against their brothers, basically.
Divide and conquer.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So,
well, again, thank you for coming on tonight. And, you know, you are going to return next week, and we are going to talk a lot about Palestine, you know, starting at their history, and then we can go forward if that works for you.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, so I will. And I'll look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for tonight, and that's it for tonight. And remember, Mercury's in retrograde. If it can go wrong, it will. We just went through a full moon, and then we went through spring equinox. So the energies are really crazy out there. So be careful with your words. You know, if things need to be fixed, fix them, or they'll break down on you. Electrical car, that kind of thing. Be careful about starting new projects, and it's a time for finishing up. Don't start any new relationships. Wait till everything goes after retrograde. Because if you start it during retrograde, a lot of times it'll fall apart. So what we're seeing on the planet now, when Mercury in retrograde, is all this unfinished business coming up to the surface, especially with Trump, and it's kind of getting exciting.
Yeah.
All right, guys, this is Cathy Bilsky, the Quantum Leap Let Light Unite show on UPRN Radio, and see you next week, same time. And have a great weekend. Aloha.
Good night. Aloha.